In the scorched wastelands, a broken alpha is a dead man walking. Roan fled the Conqueror's territory with nothing but a jagged facial scar and a target on his back. He expected a lonely death, but the waste provided 4 fierce reasons to live. A lethal enforcer, an untamed hunter, a brilliant tactician, and a silver-blonde peacemaker didn't just save him, they claimed him. To reclaim a stolen legacy, this unified pack must transform a band of refugees into a revolutionary army and breach the Citadel's titanium gates. Between silver-laced blades and toxic mutiny, Roan must decide, will he die an outcast or survive to build a throne for 5? Welcome back to Linas' Romantasy collection, where the alphas are ruggedly scarred and the queens always collect their due. Before we storm the Citadel, a quick roll call for the pack. Where in the world are you listening from right now? Let me know in the comments and drop a or a emoji if you're ready to see a tyrant finally lose his head. Today, we have a heavy hitter. It's intense, it's high stakes, and it involves one broken alpha finding a home with 4 lethal women who refuse to bow. But before we reveal the alpha's claim, if you want to support our growing pack and get early access to every chapter, hit that join button down below. Your membership helps us keep the wastelands wild and the stories coming. Now, sharpen your blades and take a deep breath. The outcast is coming for his crown. Let's read. Chapter 1. The engine of the midnight sapphire Suve roared in protest as Roan forced the heavy machine up the steep, treacherous incline. Behind him, the distant, sweeping headlights of Garrick's border patrols sliced through the thick darkness of the forest. Rowan's large hands gripped the leather steering wheel so tightly his knuckles paled. He had been driving for 14 grueling hours straight, navigating the jagged, unforgiving terrain of the neutral wastelands to escape the Conqueror's territory. If I blow the transmission out here, I'm nothing more than a sitting duck, Roan thought, his midnight blue eyes scanning the chaotic shadows ahead for any sign of a clear path. He was a towering man with broad shoulders that barely fit in the driver's seat. A jagged, pale scar ran down from his left temple to his jawline, a permanent, brutal reminder of the violence he was desperately fleeing. His pitch-black hair was cropped short, entirely practical for a life spent constantly looking over his shoulder. Taking one hand off the wheel, he began to repeatedly tap his thumb against his index finger. It was a rhythmic habit he always fell into whenever his mind raced to find a tactical advantage in a hopeless situation. The SUV bounded over a massive ditch, the reinforced steel bumpers taking the brunt of the violent impact. The vehicle was built to withstand brutal conditions, a premium, exceptionally expensive machine that offered intense protection, but even the finest engineering possessed breaking points. As Roan rounded a sharp rocky bend, a deafening sound similar to a gunshot echoed through the silent woods. The front right tire had violently struck a massive, concealed shard of flint. The heavy vehicle swerved wildly out of control. Roan fought the wheel, slamming his foot on the brakes to keep the SUV from flipping down the adjacent ravine. The truck skidded to a harsh, grinding halt, the front right side dipping dangerously low. The tire was completely ruined, the thick rubber shredded beyond any hope of repair. Roan cursed softly under his breath. He immediately killed the engine and the headlights, plunging himself into complete, suffocating darkness. He had to move on foot now. He reached over to the passenger seat and grabbed his rugged leather satchel, slinging the sturdy strap across his broad chest. It held his maps and basic provisions, everything he required to survive the next few days. He then reached into his front left pocket, his fingers brushing against a tarnished silver coin. It was the only precious relic he had left of his murdered father. Assured it was safe, he pushed the heavy door open and stepped out into the freezing night air. The damp chill of the forest floor seeped through his boots. He moved quickly away from the disabled vehicle, knowing Garrick's men would likely spot it within the hour. The forest floor was uneven and dangerous, covered in sprawling roots and hidden drops. Roan navigated the terrain with practiced ease, his large frame slipping through the dense trees with surprising silence. The faint, personal scent of smoked cedarwood trailed slightly behind him, though the biting wind quickly scattered the fragrance. He walked for what felt like miles, putting as much distance between himself and the border as possible. The adrenaline kept his legs moving, but the sheer exhaustion of the past week was finally beginning to catch up with him. He needed a place to rest, a concealed spot where he could check his map without exposing his position to enemies. He paused near a cluster of ancient, twisted trees, tapping his thumb against his index finger again as he calculated his next direction. The wind howled through the branches above, effectively masking the subtle sounds of the forest. That was his first critical mistake. A dry twig snapped directly behind him. Before Roan could turn, a dark figure dropped from the lower branches of the tree above. Strong legs locked firmly around his shoulders, throwing his balance completely off. He stumbled forward, reaching up to throw the attacker off, but a cold, sharp blade suddenly pressed flat against his throat. "Don't move a single muscle," a low, sarcastic voice whispered directly into his ear. Chapter 2. Roan froze immediately, his massive frame completely still. The cold edge of the blade rested precariously against the sensitive skin of his neck. The attacker was clearly lighter than him, but their grip was locked in perfectly, cleverly leveraging his own height and momentum against him. "I'm not with the patrols," Roan stated, keeping his voice remarkably steady and calm despite the lethal threat. "That's exactly what one of Garrick's lapdogs would say to save their own skin," the voice replied, laced with sharp, unapologetic skepticism. The assailant hopped down nimbly, keeping the knife leveled precisely at his chest, and stepped back just enough to fall under a pale beam of moonlight filtering through the canopy. Roan finally got a clear, unobstructed look. It was a woman, lean and incredibly athletic. She wore dark, practical tactical gear, and her asymmetrical dark brown hair fell sharply across one side of her face. Her amber eyes were bright, calculating, and highly assessing. The faint, calming scent of crushed lavender drifted from her, presenting a sharp contrast to the deadly weapon currently gripped in her hand. "Big guy, but he bleeds just like the rest of them if he tries anything foolish," Tamsin noted internally, her eyes darting quickly to his hands and then to his waist to thoroughly check for concealed weapons. "I left a ruined SUV 2 miles back," Roan explained, his hands raised slowly to clearly show he was unarmed. "If I were Garrick's man, I wouldn't be wandering around the wastelands alone with a busted tire." Tamsin stared at his jagged scar and the raw, undeniable exhaustion radiating from his posture. She slowly lowered the blade, though she purposefully didn't sheath it. "You're a stray. An idiot for driving that loud metal box this close to the border, but a stray nonetheless. I'm Tamsin." "Roan," he replied, letting out a measured, careful breath. "I need a safe zone, somewhere totally off the main hunting paths." Tamsin let out a dry, humorless laugh. "Safe zones are a rare luxury out here. But I know a place that's marginally better than standing out in the open. Follow me, and keep your mouth shut." They began to trek deeper into the untamed wilderness. Tamsin moved with a fluid, silent grace, her boots barely making a sound on the dry foliage. Roan followed closely, respecting her swift pace. He noticed a metallic crimson motorcycle hidden cleverly under a pile of thick brush nearby, complete with heavy saddlebags, but Tamsin walked right past it, leading him toward a rocky elevation instead. Suddenly, the wind died abruptly, leaving a suffocating stillness before a brutal clap of thunder shattered the quiet. The sky tore open, and the sudden, violent storm unleashed a dangerous wall of freezing rain. "Move!" Tamsin yelled over the deafening downpour. They sprinted up the slippery incline, the thick mud immediately grabbing at their boots. Tamsin spotted a jagged opening in the side of a large rock formation. They ducked inside the dark cave, just as the rain turned into a blinding, torrential sheet of water. The moment she crossed the threshold, Tamsin's eyes darted rapidly around the entire perimeter. She instantly scanned the back walls and the ceiling, visually checking and memorizing the dimensions and any possible secondary exits. It was a fierce compulsion she simply couldn't ignore. "It's dry enough," Roan said, shaking the cold water from his pitch-black hair. He unclasped his pack and set it gently on a flat stone. "Too dry," Tamsin muttered, her amber eyes narrowing sharply as she peered into the pitch-black depths of the cavern. Before Roan could ask what she meant, a low, vibrating growl echoed from the shadows. The sound was deep enough to rattle the stones beneath their boots. A pair of huge, glowing yellow eyes opened in the darkness. They hadn't found an empty shelter. They had just walked straight into the den of a towering, highly aggressive wasteland bear. Chapter 3. The bear lunged out of the shadows with terrifying, explosive speed, its massive claws scraping violently against the stone floor. It was an enormous beast, easily weighing over 800 pounds, heavily fueled by the primal rage of being woken in its own den. "Get back!" Roan barked, shoving his travel bag out of the way. He didn't have time to reach for a weapon. He relied purely on his raw, formidable strength to survive the moment. As the bear reared up on its hind legs to bring its heavy paws down, Roan stepped directly into its dangerous path. He caught the beast's thick forearms, his boots sliding back against the dirt as he absorbed the immense, crushing force. His broad shoulders strained, muscles bunching under his soaked shirt as he fought desperately to keep the snapping, vicious jaws away from his face. The sheer weight of the animal pressed heavily against him, immediately bruising his ribs. Getting mauled by local wildlife wasn't exactly on today's itinerary, Roan thought grimly, his boots digging much deeper into the cave floor to find solid traction. Tamsin didn't hesitate for a fraction of a second. Her hands flew down to the thigh holster strapped securely to her leg. In one fluid, practiced motion, she drew 2 of her 4 throwing knives. With a sharp flick of her wrists, the blades sliced smoothly through the dim air, sinking deeply into the thick muscle of the bear's left shoulder. The beast roared in astonishing pain, its furious focus snapping toward Tamsin. It violently threw Roan to the side, sending him crashing hard against the jagged cave wall, and charged the gamma. Roan scrambled up instantly, stubbornly ignoring the sharp, throbbing pain in his newly bruised ribs. He lunged forward, grabbing a heavy, loose stone from the ground, and smashed it forcefully against the side of the bear's skull. The double, coordinated assault was too much for the creature. Disoriented and bleeding freely, the bear let out a final, frustrated bellow before turning and scrambling deeper into the narrow, dark tunnels at the back of the cave, completely abandoning the main chamber. Roan leaned heavily against the wall, breathing in ragged gasps. He wiped a streak of dirt from his jawline, right over his jagged scar. Tamsin walked over to where the bear had been, retrieving her throwing knives from the dirt where they had fallen and wiping the blood efficiently on her pants. Before either of them could utter a word, a slow, deliberate clapping echoed from the cave entrance. Roan and Tamsin spun around instantly. Standing right in the opening, framed perfectly by the torrential rain, was a heavily muscled woman. She had short-cropped brown hair and intense, icy blue eyes that locked directly onto Roan. She wore weighted leather training gloves, and the distinct, warm scent of roasted hazelnuts followed her inside the damp cavern. "Not bad," Kenzie said, her voice a low, steady rumble that commanded the space. "I've been tracking that overgrown rug for 2 days. Didn't expect someone else to do the heavy lifting for me." "Let's see if the big guy is just for show, or if he can actually take a hit," Kenzie thought, stepping fully into the cave. She didn't look at Tamsin. Her entire, unwavering focus was on the towering alpha. "We just wanted to get out of the rain," Roan said, keeping his tone carefully neutral, but his posture visibly ready for another altercation. Kenzie slowly raised her hands. Deliberately, she began to crack her knuckles one by one, the sharp popping sounds cutting clearly through the noise of the storm outside. "A stray alpha wandering into our territory is a massive threat. I don't trust threats. Let's see what you're really made of." She didn't wait for a verbal answer. Kenzie launched herself forward with frightening, unmatched speed. She didn't use weapons, just a fiercely coiled fist aimed right at Roan's jaw. Roan had a split second to dodge, but he realized instantly that avoiding the fight would just fundamentally prove he was weak. He planted his feet and braced himself. Kenzie's weighted glove connected with the side of his face with devastating force. The impact severely bruised his jaw, rattled his teeth, and snapped his head sharply to the side. The pain was sharp and blinding, but Roan forced his legs to stay completely locked. He didn't stumble, he didn't fall. Slowly, Roan turned his head back to face her, tasting warm copper in his mouth. He looked down into her icy blue eyes. Kenzie lowered her fist, a look of genuine surprise crossing her face before beautifully settling into a grudging, respectful smirk. "All right," she said softly. You can stay. Chapter 4. By the time the violent storm finally broke the next morning, the three of them had formed a highly tentative truce. Tamsin retrieved her crimson motorcycle from the brush, hiding it much better under a thick canopy of leaves, while Kenzie confirmed her matte cobalt blue Jeep was parked safely a few miles west. They couldn't risk driving either recognizable vehicle near the populated areas, so they traveled on foot toward a dilapidated trading post to gather essential information. The trading post was a miserable, sprawling collection of rusted shipping containers and frayed canvas tents leaning precariously against the ruins of an old concrete bridge. The mud was exceptionally thick, and the air smelled strongly of unwashed bodies and bitter desperation. Roan kept his head down, his travel pack secure across his broad chest. He clenched his jaw, highly aware of the hostile, tracking stares monitoring their every movement.
"Keep your hands away from your weapons,"
Tamsin murmured, her sharp gaze already locking onto the three different, viable exits from the muddy courtyard. This place is a literal powder keg. They didn't even make it to the main supply tent. A group of 5 rough scavengers stepped out from behind a rusted container, intentionally blocking their path. The men looked desperate, armed with jagged pipes and rusted machetes. "That's a very nice bag," the lead scavenger sneered, pointing a dirty, callous finger directly at Rowan's chest. "Drop it. The boots, too." Rowan stepped slightly in front of Tamsin and Kenzie, his sharp gaze narrowing dangerously. "You really don't want to do this," he warned, his voice a low, intimidating rumble. Kenzie cracked her knuckles slowly, the sound echoing ominously in the tense space. Tamsin's hand hovered mere inches from her thigh holster. A brutal, bloody fight was seconds away, one that would draw too much attention and likely bring Garrick's patrols running straight to their location. "Excuse me, gentlemen," a bright, incredibly melodious voice called out. Everyone turned. Stepping gracefully out of a merchant's frayed canvas tent, holding a freshly purchased basket of root vegetables, was a petite woman. She had silver blonde hair that cascaded to her mid-back and large, doe-like hazel eyes that looked entirely innocent. She hummed a low, nearly silent tune as she approached the incredibly tense standoff. A bright, disarming aura of calm instantly cut through the foul, oppressive tension of the trading post. "These arrogant fools are making this almost too easy for me," Livia thought, pasting a warm, disarming smile on her lovely face.
"Livia, get out of here!"
the lead scavenger barked, though he momentarily lowered his machete at her sudden, unexpected appearance. "I was just looking for my friends," Livia said, stepping directly and smoothly between the scavengers and Roan. She reached out, gently patting the lead scavenger on the arm with her free hand. "You aren't bothering them, are you, Kale? You know the local boss strictly forbids noise in the courtyard before noon." "They have gear we need," Kale grumbled, visibly distracted by her cheerful, unthreatening demeanor. Sybil followed closely behind, her gaze scanning the vaulted ceiling. "Oh, I'm quite sure they do," Livia sighed sympathetically. As she spoke, she shifted closer to Kale, her small hands moving with invisible, highly practiced speed. She bumped against him lightly, laughing softly at something he hadn't even said. "But you really should focus on finding your own knives first." Kale frowned, deeply confused. He reached down to his worn leather belt. His rusted machete was completely gone. Livia stepped back, standing calmly next to Roan. In her hand, hidden perfectly behind her basket of vegetables, she held Kale's heavy blade, along with a rusted pistol she had flawlessly slipped from another scavenger's pocket. The scavengers realized quickly they had been played. Unarmed and suddenly facing 3 heavily muscled fighters and a smiling, dangerous thief, their false courage vanished instantly. Kale cursed loudly and waved his men away, retreating quickly back into the deep shadows of the shipping containers. Livia dropped the stolen weapons into the thick mud and looked up at Roan, her hazel eyes sparkling with clear, undeniable intelligence. "You look like you need a much better guide," she said cheerfully. Chapter 5. Livia navigated the treacherous paths branching off from the trading post with practiced ease. She still carried her woven basket of root vegetables, the stolen rusted machete and pistol concealed expertly beneath the dirty tubers. Behind her walked Roan, his large frame tense. Every step sent a jolt of sharp agony through his bruised ribs, and his jaw throbbed mercilessly from where Kenzie had struck him the previous night. He adjusted the strap of his travel pack, biting back a wince. If they realize I am wounded, I lose any leverage I might possess, Roan reasoned, forcing his posture to remain rigidly upright. He kept his hands steady, calculating their surroundings. Tamsin took the rear guard, her keen vision scanning the dense foliage. She trusted Livia's navigation, but decades of survival made her perpetually skeptical. This girl is entirely too cheerful for the wastelands. She is either a tactical genius or a lunatic, Tamsin observed, her hand hovering near the thigh holster containing her 4 throwing knives. Beside Roan, Kenzie marched with heavy, deliberate steps, her weighted training gloves swinging at her sides. She occasionally shot glances at the alpha's rigid jawline. He took my best hook and didn't drop. Maybe he isn't just another pampered royal, she admitted to herself, though she maintained a stony exterior. After an hour of grueling hiking through jagged ravines, Livia paused before a dense thicket of brambles. She hummed a low, melodic tune, a sound that seemed to signal unseen sentries. The brush parted, revealing a sprawling, hidden encampment. Tattered canvas tents and reinforced wooden barricades formed a crude sanctuary. Dozens of ragged individuals paused their daily labors to stare at the newcomers. As Roan stepped into the clearing, the atmosphere instantly soured. The strays recognized his bearing, the undeniable posture of an alpha bloodline. Growls rippled through the gathered crowd. A burly man with a scarred cheek stepped forward, clutching a rusted iron pipe. "We don't harbor conquerors here, Livia," the man sneered, gesturing aggressively toward Roan. "They look at him like he is the disease, not the cure," Livia thought sympathetically. She shifted her basket to one arm and offered a radiant, disarming smile. "He isn't a conqueror, Corbin," Livia corrected gently. "He is a refugee, just like us, and he brought these." She pulled the rusted machete from her basket, tossing it to the dirt at Corbin's feet. A gift from Kale's crew at the trading post. Corbin stared at the blade, his hostility faltering slightly, though he kept a tight grip on his pipe. Roan remained silent, his keen vision scrutinizing the defensive layout of the camp. It was pitiful. They had no tactical choke points, no elevated perimeters. If a legitimate threat arrived, these people would be slaughtered in minutes. Before Roan could voice his strategic concerns, the canopy above them violently rustled. Tamsin drew a knife instantly, and Kenzie dropped into a fighting stance. A tall, sinewy woman dropped gracefully from a thick oak branch, landing squarely in the center of the standoff. Her messy auburn hair was tied back with a frayed leather cord, and her piercing gray eyes rarely blinked as she surveyed the crowd. She wore dirt-stained canvas trousers, and a solid iron crowbar was strapped across her back. Finally some action. This camp was starting to put me to sleep, Sybil mused, stretching her long arms. She narrowed her eyes, instantly cataloging Livia's familiar posture, and a new, distinctly heavy, commanding presence radiating from the towering stranger. "We have a massive problem," Sybil announced, her voice blunt and devoid of panic. She unhooked a heavy-duty brass compass from her belt, tapping the glass. "Garrick's trackers are moving fast through the eastern ridge. They caught the trail of the bear blood from Tamsin's clothes. They are exactly 1 hour away." Panic erupted among the strays. Roan tapped his thumb against his index finger, his throbbing jaw tightening. The time for diplomacy had officially expired. Chapter 6. The chaotic shouting of the panicked strays echoed through the concealed encampment. Men and women scrambled frantically, grabbing whatever meager possessions they could carry. Roan watched the disorganized retreat for a fraction of a second before stepping forward, his broad shoulders squared. "Listen to me," Roan bellowed, his voice carrying a resonant, undeniable authority that instantly silenced the courtyard. He ignored the sharp ache in his ribs. "If you run now, you will be hunted down in the open. Garrick's trackers are faster than you, and they thrive on chasing cowards. We hold our ground here." Corbin sneered, lifting his iron pipe. "We don't take orders from an alpha. We fight our own battles." "You don't have enough weapons to fight," Roan retorted calmly, scanning the meager defenses.
But you have the terrain.
We're going to build a funnel. He commands them effortlessly, yet he doesn't force their submission. Fascinating, Livia pondered, quickly stashing her basket of vegetables near a secure tent. She retrieved her double-edged ankle dagger, gripping it tightly. Roan rapidly distributed instructions. He ordered Kenzie and Corbin to fell 3 rotted trees near the eastern entrance, creating a narrow, unavoidable bottleneck. Tamsin deployed her tactical expertise, utilizing her topographical map tablet to identify blind spots in the foliage, where she could station the few strays who possessed bows. If this makeshift militia actually holds the line, I might start believing in miracles, Tamsin thought dryly, climbing a sturdy pine tree to gain a vantage point. Sybil stood beside Roan, her face gleaming with untamed anticipation. She gripped her solid iron crowbar in both hands. They travel in packs of 6, Sybil informed him, tilting her head as the faint, unmistakable clatter of heavy armor drifted on the wind. Heavily armored, but arrogant. Arrogance breeds lethal mistakes, Roan replied. He reached into his pocket, his fingers briefly grazing his tarnished silver coin for luck, before drawing the rusted machete Livia had stolen earlier. 50 minutes later, the dense underbrush snapped aggressively. 6 towering trackers, clad in dark leather and wielding vicious weaponry, burst into the clearing. They charged forward, expecting terrified prey. Instead, they hit the bottleneck. "Now!" Roan roared. A volley of crude arrows rained down from Tamsin's carefully positioned archers, striking 2 trackers in their unprotected joints. The invaders stumbled. Kenzie launched herself from behind the fallen logs, her weighted training glove smashing into the jaw of the closest enemy with devastating momentum. This is infinitely better than hiding in a damp cave, Kenzie thought, a savage grin spreading across her face as she ducked a wild axe swing. The skirmish devolved into brutal close-quarters combat. Sybil moved with feral grace, using her crowbar to shatter a tracker's knee, while Livia darted through the chaos, using her petite frame to evade attacks and slice exposed hamstrings with her ankle dagger. Roan fought like a demon, his broad frame shielding the weaker strays. He parried a heavy broadsword with his rusted machete, the metal sparking violently. His bruised jaw throbbed, but adrenaline masked the agony. He disarmed his opponent, kicking the man backward into the mud. The strays were winning. 5 trackers lay incapacitated. However, the lead tracker, a vicious man with frantic eyes, realized the battle was lost. Desperate, he pulled a concealed serrated blade from his boot. It gleamed with the unmistakable, deadly sheen of pure silver. He lunged blindly toward Livia, whose back was turned as she secured a prisoner. I cannot lose anyone else, not again. Roan panicked internally. He abandoned his tactical position, throwing his massive body directly between the tracker and the Omega. The silver blade plunged deeply into Rowan's left shoulder. The agonizing, searing pain of the toxic metal was instantaneous, burning like liquid fire through his veins. Roan gritted his teeth, refusing to scream, and slammed the hilt of his machete into the tracker's temple, knocking him unconscious. The courtyard fell utterly silent. The battle was won, but the Alpha stumbled backward, clutching his bleeding shoulder as the silver began its venomous work. Chapter 7. The agonizing burn of the silver blade radiated through Roan's left shoulder, the toxic metal severely hindering his normally accelerated healing. He sat heavily on a wooden crate inside the commander's canvas tent, his breathing ragged. Blood soaked through his shredded shirt, dripping steadily onto the dirt floor. "Keep pressure on it," Livia instructed, pressing a wad of clean cloth against the vicious laceration. Her hands were surprisingly steady, though her doe-like hazel eyes betrayed deep concern. "I need my supplies," Kenzie declared, her voice tight. "My jeep is parked 2 miles west. I can make the round trip in 20 minutes if I sprint." He took a blade meant for an Omega. This Alpha is entirely backwards, Kenzie thought, shaking her head as she darted out of the tent, utilizing her immense beta stamina to cover the treacherous distance. Tamsin stood by the entrance, continuously checking the tent flap and the rear canvas seams visually. She hated the vulnerability of their current position. Sybil paced restlessly nearby, her gray eyes unblinking, the metallic tang of blood aggravating her sharp senses. While they waited, Roan's condition deteriorated rapidly. Silver-inflicted wounds were notoriously brutal. A violent fever seized his robust frame. His skin turned pale and clammy, and a sheen of sweat coated his forehead. The throbbing pain in his previously bruised jaw and ribs now paled in comparison to the liquid fire coursing from his shoulder.
Get away from me,
Roan growled suddenly, his expression clouding with intense delirium. He shoved Livia's hands away with terrifying, uncoordinated strength. His mind is dragging him back to the night his pack was slaughtered, Livia realized, refusing to retreat despite the danger. Roan staggered to his feet, knocking the wooden crate over. He was hallucinating, viewing the dim shadows of the tent as Garrick's assassins from his childhood. He bared his teeth, assuming a feral, defensive posture. Tamsin drew a throwing knife out of pure instinct, her amber eyes widening. "Don't you dare throw that," Sybil warned Tamsin, gripping her iron crowbar tightly but keeping it lower. Kenzie burst through the tent flap, panting heavily. She carried her comprehensive first aid kit, a rugged plastic box she meticulously maintained. "Hold him down," she ordered, popping the latches. Roan snarled, swinging a massive arm wildly. He was far too strong to restrain, even injured. If they fought him, they risked worsening the tear in his shoulder. "No, let me," Livia said softly. She stepped directly into the Alpha's striking range. "If he hits me, I will likely fracture several bones. Please don't hit me," she prayed internally. Instead of using force, Livia closed her eyes and intentionally projected an aura of absolute serenity. Her gentle, grounding presence flooded the confined space, acting as a biological balm designed to soothe fractured nerves. She reached out, gently placing her small hands on his burning cheeks. "You are safe, Roan. The fire is gone. You are safe." The soothing aroma penetrated his frenzied panic. Roan's rigid muscles slowly unlocked. The cloudy delirium in his midnight blue eyes faded, replaced by profound exhaustion. He blinked down at Livia, his massive chest heaving, before his knees finally buckled. Kenzie caught him before he hit the dirt, lowering him onto a makeshift cot. She immediately opened her first aid kit, retrieving a bottle of sterile saline, heavy-duty sutures, and thick bandages. She worked with brutal efficiency, flushing the toxic silver residue from the deep laceration before stitching the ragged flesh closed. Roan grimaced but remained docile, anchored entirely by Livia's continuous, gentle touch and her reassuring presence. The fever began to break, leaving him incredibly weak but stable. He drifted into a deep, necessary sleep, his breathing finally leveling out. The four women stood around his cot in the quiet tent, united by a silent, undeniable realization. He had bled for them, and they would stay. Chapter 8. 3 grueling days passed. The concealed stray encampment operated with a newly discovered sense of purpose, fortifying their perimeter under Tamsin's strict tactical supervision. Roan's bruised ribs and jaw had completely healed days ago, owing to his accelerated biology, but his left shoulder remained a significant liability. The deep, silver-inflicted wound was bound tightly in fresh bandages from Kenzie's medical kit. It would take months to fully mend and continuously burned with a dull, persistent ache, destined to leave a permanent, ugly scar. Despite the pain, Roan refused to remain idle. He emerged from his canvas tent at twilight, his rugged travel pack slung carefully over his uninjured right shoulder. His commanding presence preceded him, signaling his arrival to the camp. He found the 4 women gathered near a small, contained fire pit. Livia was quietly peeling remaining root vegetables, her woven cord bracelet catching the firelight. Kenzie polished her weighted leather training gloves, while Sybil studied her heavy-duty brass compass. Tamsin sat slightly apart, memorizing the newly drawn patrol routes on her map tablet. "We need to organize," Roan stated firmly, standing near the flames. His pitch-black hair caught the flickering orange light. "If we stay a fragmented militia, Garrick will simply send a larger execution squad next time," Roan analyzed grimly, tapping his right thumb against his index finger. Sybil flared her nostrils, looking up from her compass. "We are organized. We repelled the trackers. The strays are finally listening to us." "They are listening because they were terrified," Roan countered, his midnight blue eyes scanning their faces. Fear is a temporary motivator. For this camp to survive, for us to build an army capable of rivaling Garrick, these people require a genuine, unified pack. They need an undeniable hierarchy. Tamsin scoffed, setting her tablet aside. You want to declare yourself our alpha. You want us to formally submit. I ran from a tyrannical alpha to save my own life. I will never blindly bow to another man's ego, Tamsin swore silently, her gaze narrowing with suspicion. I am not asking for blind obedience, Roan clarified, his tone remarkably calm but carrying immense weight. You four are exceptional leaders, but a pack cannot possess 5 separate heads. When the final battle arrives, there must be one voice that commands the vanguard. I want that burden. Kenzie stopped wiping her gloves, her intense stare locking onto his injured shoulder. You are currently crippled. A silver laceration ruins your mobility. You cannot realistically challenge us in this state. He is brave, perhaps foolishly so. But asking for a spar while injured is pure suicide, Kenzie noted, though she respected his audacious grit. If I cannot earn your respect at my weakest, I do not deserve to lead you at my strongest, Roan replied, leaving no room for argument. I officially challenge all 4 of you to a dominant spar. Tomorrow at dawn. If I win, I become the alpha of this new pack. If I lose, I will walk away and leave this camp in your hands. Silence stretched over the crackling fire pit. The proposition was bold, bordering on madness. A 4-on-1 match against highly skilled specialists was incredibly difficult. Fighting them with a stitched, burning shoulder was practically impossible. Livia stopped peeling vegetables, her hazel eyes reflecting profound admiration. A serene calm drifted into the chilly air. You are entirely serious, she murmured softly. Sybil grinned, a wild, feral expression showing her sharp teeth. She grabbed her solid iron crowbar, resting it against her shoulder. I accept the challenge. I want to see how the big wolf dances. Kenzie cracked her knuckles one by one, the popping sounds echoing loudly. Accepted, but I will not hold back my punches. Tamsin crossed her arms, her gaze lingering on his jagged facial scar. Fine, dawn it is. Roan nodded once, turning away from the fire. The pact was sealed. Chapter 9. The crisp, pale light of dawn crept over the hidden encampment. Nearly 50 strays formed a wide, silent circle around a muddy clearing, eager to witness the momentous challenge. Roan stood in the center, stripped of his heavy overshirt. The white bandages covering his left shoulder contrasted with his tanned, scarred skin. The throbbing ache of the silver wound was agonizing, but he pushed the pain into a dark corner of his mind. I must neutralize their specific advantages without causing them permanent harm. They are my future generals, not my enemies, Roan calculated, his mind racing as he carefully assessed his opponents. The 4 women stood opposite him, spreading out to surround him in a tactical formation. Kenzie adjusted her weighted leather training gloves, her focus purely on his center of mass. Sybil crouched low to the earth, her solid iron crowbar discarded in favor of bare, feral claws. Tamsin held 2 blunt wooden practice knives she had carved overnight, honoring the non-lethal nature of the spar. Livia remained near the back, light on her feet, her wooden training dagger held defensively. Begin, Corbin shouted from the edge of the perimeter. Kenzie attacked first, charging like a runaway freight train. She aimed a devastating right hook at Roan's ribs. Roan didn't block. Instead, he pivoted sharply on his right heel, letting her immense momentum carry her past him. As she stumbled forward, he delivered a swift, sweeping kick to her ankles, sending the heavy beta crashing into the dirt. He is significantly faster than a man of his incredible size has any right to be, Kenzie realized, grunting as she immediately rolled to recover her footing. Before Roan could turn, Tamsin was there. She lunged, feigning high with her left wooden blade before slashing low with her right. Roan swayed backward, favoring his uninjured right arm. He caught Tamsin's wrist mid-strike, twisting it just enough to force her to drop the weapon. He shoved her away, but the defensive maneuver left his blind spot exposed. Sybil leaped from the side, a wild blur of sinewy limbs. She tackled Roan around the waist, attempting to drag him to the ground where his size advantage would be nullified. The sudden impact jarred his silver-lace shoulder, causing a blinding flash of agony. He gritted his teeth, refusing to collapse. He's hurt. Now is the time to break his balance, Sybil thought, tightening her fierce grip. Roan grabbed the back of Sybil's canvas collar with his right hand, hoisting her upward with pure brute strength, and tossed her gently but firmly into Kenzie, who was just standing up. They tangled together, momentarily disorganized. Livia finally made her move. She darted forward silently, slipping beneath Roan's guard with extraordinary grace. She aimed her wooden dagger directly at his heart. Instead of retreating, he stepped directly into her space. He caught her forearm, his large hand enveloping her delicate wrist, and swept her legs out from under her. He caught her by the waist before she hit the ground, lowering her safely. He possesses immense power, yet he employs such astonishing restraint, Livia observed breathlessly, gazing up at him. Tamsin charged again, but Roan was ready. He released Livia, spun, and caught Tamsin in a firm, unbreakable headlock with his good arm. Kenzie and Sybil scrambled to their feet, preparing to rush him simultaneously. Roan tightened his grip on Tamsin just enough to show dominance, standing tall despite the blood seeping faintly through his fresh shoulder bandages. He released a low, thunderous growl that vibrated through the clearing. It wasn't an oppressive aura. It was pure, undeniable authority forged in suffering and resilience. Kenzie halted her charge. She looked at his bleeding shoulder, then at her own trembling hands. She lowered her fists and deliberately dropped to one knee, bowing her head. Sybil exhaled a long breath and knelt beside her. Roan released Tamsin, stepping back respectfully. Tamsin rubbed her neck, a faint smirk crossing her face before she, too, submitted. Livia gracefully stood, smoothing her clothes, and knelt smoothly with her companions. The surrounding strays erupted into triumphant cheers. Chapter 10. The hidden stray encampment swelled with new arrivals. Over the next week, dozens of castaways filtered through the bramble perimeter, drawn by whispers of an alpha who fought on the front lines. Roan stood near the command tent, his right hand resting on the hilt of his stolen, rusted machete. His left arm hung rigidly at his side. The silver-inflicted laceration beneath his shirt burned with a relentless, stinging fire, strictly limiting his upper body mobility. If they notice I can barely lift a shield, this fragile loyalty will evaporate, Roan noted grimly, forcing his posture straight despite the searing discomfort. He watched Kenzie organize the newcomers. The sturdy beta wore her weighted training gloves, directing the fearful refugees toward the supply crates. They were a ragged bunch, shivering and underfed. "We have a complication," Tamsin declared, striding up to Roan. Her asymmetrical brown hair was tied back, and her amber eyes narrowed with annoyance. She held her ruggedized map tablet in one hand. "I sent scouts to the scrap metal fortress down in the valley. The leader there, a rogue named Bram, violently rejected our offer of an alliance." Roan frowned. "Did he send a counteroffer?" "He sent back my scout with a broken nose," Tamsin replied coldly. "Bram claims this entire sector belongs to him. He demands we surrender our weapons and pay a weekly tribute, or he will march his thugs up here and burn this forest down." Livia approached smoothly from the medical tent, overhearing the conversation. She adjusted the woven cord bracelet on her wrist. These territorial warlords always let their massive egos write checks their skills cannot cash, she mused, keeping her expression perfectly serene. A two-front war is disastrous. Garrick's patrols are still searching for us to the east. If Bram attacks from the south, we are trapped. Sybil dropped silently from a nearby oak tree, her gray eyes gleaming. She gripped her heavy-duty brass compass. Bram has 60 men. They wield crude firearms and heavy chains. A frontal assault would be a massacre for our untrained people. Roan kept his hands perfectly still by his sides to prevent predictability. "We cannot afford an open battle. Not with my shoulder compromised, and not with half our camp comprised of malnourished civilians. I should just sneak into his fortress tonight and slit his throat while he sleeps," Tamsin calculated. her grip tightening on the edge of her tablet. But Roan wants a united front, not a string of assassinations. "Show me the fortress layout," Roan ordered. Tamsin swiped the screen of her digital device, pulling up a detailed topographical scan of the valley. The fortress was an ugly, sprawling maze, constructed from rusted shipping crates and welded vehicles. The main gate was heavily fortified, flanked by guard towers. "The perimeter wall is solid iron," Tamsin explained, tracing a line on the glowing screen. "However, my scouts noticed something interesting on the western ridge. See this depression in the dirt?" Roan leaned over, his gaze intently studying the map. A dried riverbed. "Exactly," Tamsin confirmed, a sharp smile touching her lips. "When the factory was operational decades ago, they installed a massive industrial drainage pipe that runs directly underneath the western wall. It exits right behind their primary armory. It is a severe tactical weakness." Sybil flared her nostrils, sampling the dry wind. "A metal pipe? It will echo if we aren't careful." "Then we will be invisible," Roan decided, the plan solidifying in his mind. "We strike tonight, just the 5 of us. If we capture Bram inside his own stronghold, his men will capitulate without a bloodbath." The 4 women nodded in unison. The trap was set. Roan looked at the setting sun, casting long, eerie shadows across the muddy clearing. "Gather your gear. Livia, keep your pistol concealed. Kenzie, we might need you to break a few locks quietly. We leave at dusk." The camp continued to bustle around them, blissfully unaware that their new leaders were about to embark on a highly precarious infiltration mission. The cool evening air held the distinct promise of impending violence. Chapter 11. The darkness of the valley was suffocating. The 5 infiltrators moved like phantoms through the dry, rocky riverbed, keeping their profiles low. Roan led the formation, holding his rusted machete firmly in his right hand. The steep descent had aggravated his stitched shoulder, sending sharp spasms of agony across his chest, but he locked the pain away behind a stoic facade. "I am a liability in tight spaces right now. I must rely on their speed," Roan admitted to himself, glancing back at his team. Tamsin navigated using the faint glow of her tablet, her 4 throwing knives securely holstered on her thigh. They reached the entrance of the industrial drainage pipe. It was an enormous cylindrical tunnel constructed of corrugated steel, partially choked with dried mud and decaying debris. "Single file," Tamsin whispered. "The exit should dump us right into the blind alley behind Bram's armory." They crawled into the oppressive darkness. The air inside the pipe was stale and tasted faintly of rust. Kenzie followed Roan, her weighted gloves scraping softly against the metal. Livia moved with delicate precision, her petite frame easily navigating the cramped confines. Sybil brought up the rear, her solid iron crowbar secured tightly to her back to prevent it from clanging against the walls. After a grueling, claustrophobic crawl, Roan reached the rusted grate at the end of the tunnel. He used his good arm to push the heavy iron lattice aside. It gave way with a muted groan. He slipped out into the chilly night air, immediately dropping into a defensive crouch. The others filed out silently behind him. Roan slowly stood, his eyes adjusting to the dim moonlight. The map had promised a secluded alleyway, a perfect blind spot to launch their ambush. Instead, they found themselves standing in the center of a sunken concrete courtyard. High walls made of welded scrap metal boxed them in on all 4 sides. At the top of those walls, harsh floodlights suddenly snapped on, blinding them. "Well, look what the wasteland dragged in." A cruel, mocking voice echoed through the compound. The map was outdated. He renovated his defenses. "We walked straight into a kill cage." Tamsin realized, a cold wave of dread washing over her. She instantly drew 2 blades, her amber eyes scanning the elevated walkways for a target. Dozens of armed rogues appeared on the catwalks above, leveling crude firearms and heavy crossbows down at the trapped group. Standing on a balcony overlooking the concrete pit was Bram. He was a lanky, scarred man with a vicious sneer. "Did you really think a drainage pipe would remain unsealed in my fortress?" Bram taunted, laughing harshly. "I left that grate open as a rat trap, and you scurried right in." Roan stepped in front of Livia, shielding her with his broad frame. "Bram, surrender now, and your men live." "You are in no position to make demands, crippled alpha," Bram spat, noticing how Roan favored his right side. "Fire on them!" Before the first crossbow bolt could be released, Sybil moved. These metal walls are structurally unsound. I can visually trace the deep corrosion eating the base, she deduced instantly. She didn't aim for the men above. Sybil sprinted toward the corner of the concrete pit, unhooking her iron crowbar in one fluid motion. She spotted a severely corroded load-bearing beam supporting the catwalk, where a cluster of gunmen stood. With a feral shout, Sybil swung the heavy crowbar with devastating force. The metal connected with the rusted beam, producing a deafening metallic shriek. The weakened support buckled instantly. The entire western section of the catwalk collapsed, sending a half-dozen of Bram's men screaming into the dirt below. The structure crashed against the perimeter wall, tearing a massive, jagged hole in the barricade. Dust and debris exploded into the air, plunging the courtyard into chaotic darkness.
Move!
Roan roared, grabbing Livia's hand and charging toward the newly created exit. Chapter 12. The dust from the collapsed catwalk created a dense, choking smokescreen. Roan dragged Livia through the jagged hole in the scrap metal wall, stepping over the groaning bodies of Bram's fallen guards. Tamsin and Kenzie surged right behind them, coughing but unharmed.
Do not let them escape!
Bram shrieked from the surviving section of the balcony, his voice cracking with panicked fury. He expects us to run. That is exactly what a coward would do. Kenzie sneered internally, her cold stare locking onto the staircase leading up to Bram's position.
We aren't leaving,
Rowan declared, his voice a low, terrifying rumble that carried over the chaos.
Sybil, secure the breach. Kenzie, with me.
Rowan didn't hesitate. Ignoring the fiery protests of his stitched shoulder, he sprinted toward the rusted staircase. Two of Bram's guards stepped into his path, raising heavy iron pipes. Kenzie was faster. She vaulted over a fallen beam, her weighted gloves connecting with the first guard's jaw, sending him spinning into the dirt. Roan sidestepped the second man, using the flat side of his machete to strike the guard's temple, instantly incapacitating him. They charged up the stairs. Bram frantically tried to unholster a scavenged revolver, his hands shaking as the massive alpha closed the distance. Roan knocked the weapon away with a swift kick, then lunged forward, pressing the cold, rusted edge of his blade directly against Bram's throat. "Tell them to drop their weapons," Roan commanded quietly, his intense stare boring into the rogue leader's terrified face. Bram swallowed hard, feeling the sharp steel nick his skin. "Stand down!" he yelled to his remaining men. "Drop everything!" The clatter of weapons hitting the compound echoed through the compound. The scrapyard fortress had fallen in less than 10 minutes. By the following afternoon, the logistics of merging the two camps were chaotic. Bram's men were disarmed and marched to the hidden stray encampment, swelling their numbers significantly. The sheer volume of new bodies in the forest clearing created a claustrophobic, noisy environment. Tamsin stood near the perimeter barricades, cataloging the confiscated firearms on her map tablet. The air was thick with shouting, unfamiliar faces, and the tense energy of hundreds of uneasy wolves. Suddenly, a loud argument broke out between two new recruits over a water ration. Someone shoved a wooden crate, and it shattered loudly against a rock. The sharp, violent noise triggered something deep inside Tamsin. Her breath hitched. The crowded encampment blurred, replaced by the terrifying memory of her original pack being slaughtered. The screaming, the crushing bodies, the desperate, cowardly flight she took to survive. Her chest tightened incredibly fast, like a heavy boulder crushing her lungs. She stumbled backward, dropping her tablet into the mud, her hands trembling violently. "I am trapped. I need to run. They are going to die and I cannot stop it." Tamsin panicked internally, her vision wide and unseeing. She backed into the rough bark of an oak tree, gasping for air that refused to fill her lungs. Tamsin. A large, warm hand rested gently on her uninjured shoulder. It was Roan. He had noticed her sudden retreat from across the courtyard. He stepped into her line of sight, blocking out the chaotic crowd, creating a quiet barrier between her and the noise. "Look at me," Roan instructed, his voice remarkably steady and grounding. He didn't ask what was wrong. He simply offered a tether to reality. "You are here. The perimeter is secure. You built these defenses yourself." Tamsin stared at the pale scar on his jawline. She focused on the rhythmic, calming cadence of his breathing. Slowly, the terrifying flashbacks receded. Her trembling subsided as the present moment solidified. "I'm fine," she whispered hoarsely, bending down to retrieve her muddy tablet. She refused to meet his gaze, thoroughly ashamed of her vulnerability. "I know," Roan replied softly, patting her arm once before walking away to give her space. He never mentioned the incident again, but in that silent understanding, Tamsin realized she had finally found an alpha worth trusting. Chapter 13. Rumors of a unified stray army, led by a towering, scarred alpha, spread through the wastelands like a virulent plague. It took precisely 5 days for the whispers to reach the opulent, heavily fortified citadel of the Conqueror. Garrick sat on a lavishly carved wooden chair, listening to his trembling scouts report the fall of Bram's scrapyard. The massive, thick-necked alpha sneered, his cold slate eyes narrowing with lethal intent. He despised loose ends, and a surviving heir to a bloodline he had supposedly eradicated decades ago was the ultimate insult. He wouldn't send a noisy battalion to handle a pest. He would send the shadows. Back at the hidden stray encampment, the night was unusually quiet. The merge pack had settled into a comfortable rhythm. The defenses were robust and morale was tentatively high. The campfires had burned down to cold ash, and the hundreds of refugees were deeply asleep beneath their canvas tents. Roan lay on his makeshift cot inside the command tent. The silver wound in his left shoulder throbbed with a dull, persistent ache, making sleep elusive. He stared at the dark fabric ceiling, his right hand resting near the tarnished silver coin in his pocket. "We are growing too fast. The larger the footprint, the easier it is for predators to track," Roan analyzed, a lingering sense of paranoia keeping his senses sharp. Across the compound, Livia slept soundly in a small enclosure. Her woven cord bracelet rested on the blanket beside her. Suddenly, she stirred. Her delicate nose twitched in her sleep. The quiet, ambient noise of the forest was abruptly broken by a faint, unnatural stillness. An eerie, calculated silence that only trained killers produced. "That doesn't belong in the woods," Livia thought sleepily, her hazel eyes snapping open. She sat up, her heart suddenly beating rapidly, fluttering erratically against her ribs. She reached silently for her ankle dagger. At the eastern edge of the perimeter, 3 figures clad in sound-dampening stealth gear slipped flawlessly past the wooden barricades. They were Garrick's elite assassins, professionals who moved without disturbing a single leaf. They didn't carry firearms, they wielded long, incredibly thin blades coated in a paralytic toxin. Their orders were explicit: bypass the common rabble, locate the female lieutenants to shatter the Alpha's support structure, and then assassinate the Alpha himself. One assassin broke off from the trio, gliding silently toward Livia's tent. He slipped a thin weapon through the canvas seam, slicing it open with a whisper of fabric. Livia was already standing in the dark, her back pressed against the supporting wooden pole. As the assassin stepped through the slit, raising his toxic blade toward her empty cot, Livia lunged. She drove her small dagger toward his exposed neck. The assassin reacted with terrifying speed, catching her wrist mid-strike. He twisted her arm brutally, forcing her to drop the weapon. He raised his own blade to silence her permanently. A massive, heavy body tore through the front flap of the tent. Roan's primal instincts had alerted him to the unnatural silence outside his own quarters. He crashed into the assassin like a runaway truck, tackling the man away from Livia. The sheer force of the impact sent them both crashing through the side of the tent and out into the muddy courtyard. The assassin rolled fluidly, springing to his feet and slashing his blade horizontally. Roan dodged, but the movement sent a blinding flare of pain through his stitched shoulder. He was unarmed, having rushed out without his machete. The noise of the struggle shattered the peaceful night. Shouts erupted across the camp. Tamsin burst from her quarters, a throwing knife already gleaming in her hand, while Kenzie sprinted into the clearing. The 2 other assassins emerged from the shadows, flanking Roan. The Conqueror's elite had officially breached their sanctuary, and the pack was caught completely off guard in the dark. Chapter 14. The clash in the muddy courtyard erupted into a visceral blur of frantic motion. Roan, currently bereft of his acquired machete, dodged the initial horizontal slash of the first elite assassin. The lethal, toxin-coated blade missed his throat by mere millimeters. His left shoulder, heavily burdened by the stitched silver laceration, screamed in agonizing protest as he twisted his massive torso to evade the strike. He parried a secondary thrust by swatting the attacker's forearm with his uninjured right hand, relying heavily on his overwhelming brute strength to destabilize the interloper. If they realize I am fighting one-handed, they will easily outmaneuver my defenses, Roan calculated grimly, grinding his teeth to suppress a sharp groan of exertion. 2 additional shadows detached from the periphery, flanking the Alpha in perfect silence. They wielded identical, slender, insidious weapons. Before they could synchronize their assault, Tamsin intervened. The Gamma launched a throwing knife with impeccable precision. The projectile embedded deeply into the thigh of the right flanking assassin, halting his lethal advance. I will not let another sanctuary fall while I am still breathing, Tamsin vowed internally, her grip tightening on a second blade as she sprinted toward the chaotic fray. Kenzie arrived a fraction of a second later. She did not bother with intricate martial techniques. She utilized her raw, belligerent power. Her weighted training gloves collided with the wounded assassin's ribcage. The sickening crunch of fracturing bone resonated through the damp nocturnal air, sending the man sprawling into the dirt. The skirmish momentarily stalled. The lead assassin, realizing a frontal confrontation against the Alpha and his formidable enforcers was tactically deficient, swiftly reassessed the battlefield. His cold gaze flicked toward Livia, who had just emerged from the remnants of her brutally sliced canvas tent. She was fully disarmed, having lost her ankle dagger during the preliminary struggle. A malevolent realization visibly dawned on the Conqueror's elite soldier. To shatter the Alpha's indomitable spirit, he needed to dismantle his vital support structure. The assassin pivoted with ephemeral speed, entirely circumventing Rowan's defensive perimeter, and lunged directly toward the defenseless Omega. He is bypassing me entirely. The coward is prioritizing the most vulnerable target. Rowan realized, an icy dread paralyzing his thoughts for a minuscule fraction of a second. Livia braced herself, crossing her arms in a rudimentary defensive posture. She possessed no illusions about her physical limitations against an armed, specialized killer. This is going to hurt significantly more than a simple sparring match, Livia anticipated, refusing to close her eyes or cower before the incoming strike. Rowan propelled himself forward, abandoning all pragmatic caution. He ignored the excruciating protests of his stitched shoulder and threw his towering frame across the muddy expanse. He intercepted the assassin just as the slender blade descended. Instead of finding Livia's delicate flesh, the toxic steel plunged deeply into Roan's right oblique, sliding mercilessly between his ribs. The paralytic poison ignited instantly within his bloodstream, a venomous concoction designed to incapacitate heavily muscled combatants. Roan released a guttural, earth-shaking roar. Utilizing his remaining momentum, he grabbed the assassin by the tactical harness and hurled the man violently against the sturdy wooden perimeter barricade. The wooden beam splintered under the immense impact, rendering the attacker unconscious. Rowan collapsed onto the damp earth, his breathing instantly becoming shallow and erratic. Livia dropped to her knees beside him, her hands hovering frantically over the rapidly pooling blood.
Kenzie! Bring a medical kit immediately!
Livia commanded, her typically serene demeanor fracturing into genuine panic. Sybil finally bounded into the clearing, her iron crowbar gripped tightly. She surveyed the neutralized threats and the fallen leader. The Delta's expression hardened into a mask of obdurate fury. The sanctuary was irrevocably compromised. Garrick knew their exact coordinates, and their vanguard was now critically incapacitated. The night had spiraled into an unmitigated disaster. Chapter 15. The encampment descended into an organized frenzy beneath the oppressive canopy of the forest. The paralytic toxin ravaging Roan's system mandated immediate evacuation. Garrick's forces would inevitably send a larger, heavily armed battalion once the stealth assassins failed to report back. Kenzie worked with meticulous, frantic efficiency, applying a heavy pressure dressing to Roan's punctured oblique and administering a broad-spectrum coagulant from her comprehensive first aid kit. The Alpha remained semi-conscious, his resilient constitution fiercely battling the insidious chemical agent. He acts as an impenetrable shield for everyone else, yet he actively refuses to protect himself, Kenzie lamented silently, securing the final bandage with a sharp tug. Tamsin consulted her topographical map tablet, her digits flying across the illuminated screen. She cross-referenced historical military schematics she had downloaded years prior. There is a subterranean concrete redoubt approximately 12 miles north, Tamsin announced to the gathered lieutenants. It is a defunct Cold War-era installation. The primary blast doors are ostensibly intact. It will provide the defensive fortification this wooden palisade severely lacks. We are running again. It feels like a perpetual cycle of retreat, but pragmatism must override pride, Tamsin acknowledged, suppressing a bitter sigh. The arduous migration commenced before dawn. The strays dismantled what meager supplies they possessed, abandoning the heavier, cumbersome canvas tents. Roan stubbornly refused to be carried on a stretcher, but his failing body gave him no choice. Kenzie loaded him into the back of her cobalt blue Jeep, driving the wounded Alpha carefully over the uneven terrain. Livia rode tightly beside him, constantly monitoring his fluctuating pulse, her woven cord bracelet stained with dried mud from the previous altercation. They reached the concrete bunker just as the morning sun crusted the jagged horizon. The installation was a monolithic, brutalist structure embedded into the side of a granite cliff. Sybil utilized her iron crowbar to manually pry open the rusted auxiliary hatch, granting the exhausted refugees access to the cavernous subterranean interior. The bunker provided unparalleled security, but it was profoundly desolate. The concrete walls radiated a chilling dampness, and the rudimentary ventilation system barely circulated the stagnant air. Morale plummeted rapidly among the civilian strays. They had traded a vulnerable forest camp for a fortified tomb. Compounding their despair was a severe logistical crisis. Their hasty midnight exodus had forced them to abandon the majority of their perishable rations. We have enough potable water from the internal cisterns, but our caloric reserves will barely sustain this population for 48 hours, Livia reported, her voice echoing softly in the dim command center. Hunger breeds dissent faster than any conqueror's propaganda, Livia noted, observing the hollow, frightened expressions of the displaced families huddling in the corridors. Roan lay propped against a concrete pillar, his complexion pale. He attempted to issue a verbal order, but a violent coughing fit seized his lungs, forcing him into a grimace of profound discomfort. "You are medically barred from speaking," Kenzie admonished, pressing a canteen to his lips. Sybil stepped forward, her posture rigid and restless. The confined subterranean environment deeply agitated her feral sensibilities. She unhooked her brass compass from her belt, studying the cardinal directions. "I cannot remain idle in a concrete box while our people slowly starve. The northern ridge is heavily populated with wild game, though it borders Garrick's primary transit routes. If I stay underground any longer, my instincts will completely atrophy," Sybil reasoned, eager to embrace the perilous freedom of the wilderness. "It is incredibly dangerous to traverse that sector without backup," Tamsin warned, though she did not attempt to confiscate the Delta's equipment. "I thrive in the margins," Sybil replied bluntly. She adjusted her canvas jacket, secured her crowbar, and vanished through the auxiliary hatch into the glaring daylight, embarking on a solitary, high-stakes hunt. Chapter 16. Sybil navigated the treacherous northern ridge with preternatural grace. The terrain was incredibly rugged, characterized by steep limestone ravines and dense, unforgiving bramble thickets. She moved silently, her boots finding solid purchase on the loose shale. Her initial objective was to track a herd of wild mountain goats she had spotted tracks for near a subterranean stream. However, her meticulous hunt was abruptly derailed by a mechanical anomaly echoing through the pristine wilderness. The unmistakable, rhythmic growl of heavy diesel engines reverberated against the canyon walls. Sybil abandoned the goat tracks, dropping into a low crouch as she scrambled up a precarious limestone outcropping to gain a tactical vantage point. Garrick's forces are mobilizing significantly faster than our most pessimistic projections anticipated, Sybil realized, peering cautiously over the rocky ledge. Below her, winding through a narrow valley pass, was an extensive, heavily armed supply convoy. It consisted of 4 reinforced transport trucks, each adorned with the Conqueror's despotic insignia. The vehicles were flanked by a dozen outriders mounted on heavily modified all-terrain motorcycles. Sybil's keen sight scanned the cargo beds of the trucks. They were brimming with military-grade armaments, medical crates, and, most importantly, enormous pallets of vacuum-sealed nutritional rations. It was a logistical goldmine, capable of sustaining the displaced strays in their concrete redoubt for months. This is a suicidal temptation. Engaging an entire mechanized platoon alone is the epitome of foolishness, Sybil assessed, her analytical mind clashing with her audacious instincts. She possessed neither the firepower nor the numerical superiority to conquer the convoy. Fleeing back to the bunker was the pragmatic choice, ensuring her own survival. Yet, the image of the starving refugees huddled in the damp darkness anchored her boots to the stone. She could not walk away from such a monumental bounty. She formulated a brazen, esoteric strategy. She would incapacitate the vanguard, stalling the entire procession within the narrowest section of the pass, and summon the pack for a coordinated ambush. Sybil descended the cliff face with terrifying speed, keeping entirely within the peripheral shadows. She sprinted parallel to the convoy, outpacing the lumbering transport vehicles until she reached a sharp, blind curve in the dirt road. She concealed herself behind a cluster of massive boulders, retrieving her solid iron crowbar. As the lead truck negotiated the tight corner, its speed dropped drastically. Sybil lunged from her concealment. She did not target the heavily armored cab. Instead, she aimed for the exposed mechanical underbelly. Sliding perilously close to the massive rotating tires, she jammed the heavy iron crowbar directly into the exposed front transaxle with phenomenal, localized force. The resulting cacophony was deafening. The heavy iron shattered the intricate mechanical components, locking the front axle securely in place. The massive truck skidded violently, the rear wheels losing traction. It jackknifed across the narrow dirt road, slamming into the adjacent rock wall and effectively barricading the entire pass. The subsequent vehicles slammed their brakes, creating a chaotic, disorganized pileup. Sybil immediately scrambled up the canyon wall, narrowly avoiding a volley of indiscriminate rifle fire from the startled outriders. Reaching a secure elevation, she retrieved a stolen, high-intensity emergency flare she had scavenged weeks prior. She ignited the device and hurled it into the sky. The brilliant, crimson illumination pierced the afternoon clouds, a silent, undeniable distress beacon directed precisely toward the southern redoubt. It burned with a fierce intensity, casting an eerie scarlet hue over the jagged rocks. The invitation has been sent. Let us see if our recovering Alpha can still manage to answer the call, Sybil thought, settling into a concealed, elevated crevice to monitor the ensuing chaos. She watched the outriders dismount, their voices echoing with confusion and belligerent shouting as they attempted to rapidly assess the catastrophic mechanical failure. She had successfully trapped the beast. Now, she merely had to wait for the hunters to arrive. Chapter 17. The crimson flare blooming over the northern ridge triggered an immediate explosive response within the subterranean bunker. Roan observed the brilliant streak of light through a narrow observation slit. Despite the paralytic toxin still lingering in his bloodstream and the dual lacerations marring his torso, the Alpha did not hesitate. The prospect of securing critical provisions eclipsed his profound physical agony. "Arm yourselves," Roan commanded, his voice a gravelly baritone that commanded immediate attention. "Sybil has cornered prey. We do not leave our delta isolated. If I succumb to these injuries today, I will do so ensuring my people are fed," Roan determined, buckling a scavenged tactical vest over his heavily bandaged chest. Tamsin and Kenzie spearheaded the rapid deployment, rallying 30 of their most capable fighters to navigate the rugged terrain with desperate urgency. Roan followed far behind their vanguard, stubbornly leaning his entire weight on Corbin, his vision swimming from the paralytic agent as he forced his failing body toward the canyon pass. The Conqueror's guards were entirely preoccupied with the mechanical obstruction, oblivious to the coordinated ambush descending upon their exposed flanks. The skirmish was exceptionally brutal and remarkably brief. Tamsin orchestrated the assault with clinical precision. She deployed her fighters along the elevated ridges, utilizing the geographical advantage to rain a relentless barrage of suppressed rifle fire upon the disorganized convoy guards. Kenzie bypassed the perimeter entirely, charging directly into the chaotic fray. She utilized her weighted gloves to systematically shatter the defenses of the remaining outriders, her movements a devastating display of pure kinetic energy. These arrogant foot soldiers have grown exceptionally complacent under Garrick's tyrannical umbrella, Tamsin observed from her elevated vantage point, effectively coordinating the crossfire via hand signals. Within 20 minutes, the convoy was entirely neutralized. The surviving guards surrendered, dropping their armaments into the dusty road. The strays erupted into triumphant cheers, swarming the transport vehicles to inspect the monumental spoils. They discovered crates of heavy munitions, vital medical supplies, and enough vacuum-sealed rations to sustain their burgeoning population for the remainder of the brutal season. Kenzie, however, bypassed the nutritional pallets. Her keen auditory senses detected a faint, rhythmic thumping emanating from the rear of the final, heavily armored transport truck. The exterior was secured with a massive, industrial-grade padlock. "Bring me a sledgehammer," Kenzie requested, her tone uncharacteristically flat and devoid of celebratory enthusiasm. A stray quickly provided the heavy tool. Kenzie swung it with phenomenal force, shattering the reinforced locking mechanism in a single, devastating blow. She hauled the heavy steel doors open, expecting to uncover a hidden cache of specialized weaponry, or perhaps a mobile command center. Instead, the stifling, dimly lit interior was occupied by a dozen emaciated prisoners. They were shackled to the floorboards, their clothing reduced to tattered rags. As the sunlight penetrated the gloom, several of the captives raised their hands to shield their sensitive eyes. Kenzie froze, her robust posture stiffening into an unyielding statue. She scanned the faces of the wretched captives. The air vanished from her lungs, replaced by a suffocating, visceral wave of horrific recognition. These were not random political dissidents or captured rogues. This cannot be real. The universe possesses an incredibly malevolent sense of humor, Kenzie realized, her knuckles turning bone-white as she gripped the edge of the steel door. Sitting in the darkest corner of the sweltering transport was the former alpha of her original pack, flanked by his cruelest lieutenants. These were the exact individuals who had relentlessly abused her, demeaned her beta status, and violently exiled her into the unforgiving wastelands. The ghosts of her most agonizing trauma were suddenly materialized, bound in iron chains, and entirely at her complete mercy. Roan finally staggered up beside her, supported heavily by Corbin. He noticed the profound devastation etched across her normally stoic features, silently awaiting her inevitable judgment. Chapter 18. Kenzie stared into the gloomy interior of the Conqueror's transport truck. The sweltering cargo bay felt like a claustrophobic oven, radiating intense heat from the sun-baked metal roof. The sledgehammer in her grip felt like a massive, unwieldy anchor. Chained to the corrugated steel floorboards was her former tormentor, an alpha named Torin, alongside his cruelest lieutenants. They appeared pathetic, stripped of their opulent garments and bruised from the tumultuous journey. "This is the tyrant who ordered me beaten and banished for questioning a foolish tactical error," Kenzie recalled. A cold, visceral rage coiled tightly within her chest. She stepped into the cargo bay, her boots crunching over the shattered remnants of the industrial padlock she had destroyed minutes prior. Torin squinted against the glaring afternoon sunlight. Recognition slowly dawned on his grime-streaked face. He released a harsh, arrogant bark of laughter despite his miserable confinement. "The exiled beta. Have you come to beg for a place back in a legitimate pack?" Kenzie tightened her grip on the wooden handle of the hammer. She raised the formidable tool, the forged steel head hovering perilously inches from Torin's skull. The strays outside fell utterly silent, anticipating a gruesome, justified execution. A sudden resounding thud behind her shattered the dense tension. Kenzie whipped around to see Roan collapse to the dusty earth. His robust constitution had finally capitulated to the dual traumas wreaking havoc on his biology. His legs buckled beneath him, unable to support his towering weight any longer. The paralytic agent injected during the midnight ambush was actively seizing his muscular system, while the unhealed silver sutures on his left shoulder burned with a toxic intensity. His breathing emerged in shallow, ragged gasps, his scavenged tactical vest rising and falling erratically as he struggled merely to remain conscious. "Roan!" Livia cried out, rushing forward alongside Tamsin. The Gamma dropped her topographical map tablet into the dirt, abandoning protocol to slide her arms under the Alpha's right shoulder. Livia supported his left side, wincing in profound sympathy as the movement aggravated his stitch laceration. They strained immensely to support his massive, incapacitated frame. Kenzie looked from her critically injured leader back to the chained tyrant. Executing Tauren would provide a fleeting, hollow satisfaction. However, Roan had demonstrated repeatedly that true strength resided in measured restraint and building a future, rather than wallowing endlessly in a bloody, vindictive past. "You possess zero power here, Tauren," Kenzie declared, lowering the sledgehammer. She turned to the nearest stray who had assisted in the raid. "Unshackle them. Give them 2 canteens of water." The lieutenant gasped in sheer disbelief. "You are letting us go?" "I am banishing you," Kenzie corrected, her tone devoid of any lingering trauma or fear. "You are formally stripped of our protection. If I see your faces within our territory again, I will not hesitate to end you. Run." The former abusers scrambled out of the transport, fleeing cowardly into the treacherous canyon. Kenzie exhaled a long, liberating breath, the invisible weight of her past dissolving. Nearby, Sybil approached the jackknife lead truck. She attempted to retrieve her weapon from the vehicle's underbelly. She examined the catastrophic mechanical failure, realizing her reliable instrument was now merely a structural component of the wrecked machine. The solid iron was permanently fused and grotesquely twisted within the ruined transaxle, deformed beyond repair by the monumental kinetic friction. Sybil clicked her tongue in annoyance, officially abandoning the ruined tool. Kenzie tossed the sledgehammer aside and sprinted toward her companions, determined to assist with the Alpha's urgent medical evacuation. Chapter 19. The perilous drive back to the subterranean concrete redoubt proceeded under the concealing cloak of twilight. Tamsin piloted the commandeered diesel transport with grim efficiency, navigating the rugged terrain while Livia monitored Roan in the cramped passenger seat. The Alpha remained largely unresponsive, a dangerous pallor clinging to his features. He was physically incapable of fighting, his formidable body trapped in a paralytic struggle. Upon arriving at the bunker, the starving strays swarmed the vehicles, erupting into ecstatic cheers as the monumental bounty of vacuum-sealed rations and medical crates was unloaded. The logistical nightmare plaguing the displaced refugees was temporarily solved, but a profound crisis of leadership rapidly brewed within the command sector. Kenzie arranged a makeshift infirmary on a sturdy metal table in the bunker's primary control room. She administered a secondary, aggressive dose of broad-spectrum coagulant to Roan's right oblique, meticulously avoiding the still-burning silver stitches marring his left shoulder. He lay motionless, a formidable warrior reduced to a fragile, bedridden patient. The escalating stress of the impending war and their leader's critical condition catalyzed a bitter, vitriolic dispute among the lieutenants. "We must launch a coordinated frontal assault while Garrick is disorganized from the convoy loss," Kenzie argued, pacing the cold concrete floor. "We acquired heavy munitions today. We strike before he can reinforce his perimeter." "That is tactical suicide," Tamsin countered fiercely, her arms crossed tight against her chest. "We possess a mere fraction of his standing army. We need to deploy explosive traps and wage a sustained guerrilla campaign. Both of those strategies invite prolonged attrition." Sybil interjected, pacing like a caged predator. Bereft of her reliable iron weapon, she seemed physically unbalanced and agitated. "We sever the head. We need a focused strike team infiltrating his citadel tonight." "And who exactly leads this hypothetical strike team?" Livia demanded, her voice acquiring an uncharacteristically sharp edge. She gestured toward the motionless Alpha on the table. "He is dying, and you 3 are bickering over theoretical warfare?" The argument escalated into a chaotic cacophony of overlapping voices, each woman fiercely defending her respective military doctrine. The underlying unspoken terror of losing the only genuine sanctuary they had ever known fueled their escalating anger. "Stop." The command was a raspy, agonizing whisper, but it silenced the room instantaneously. Roan struggled to prop himself up on his uninjured right elbow, his face a mask of excruciating discomfort. He refused to lie dormant while his unified pack fractured under the pressure. "You are not fighting over strategy," Roan observed, his breathing noticeably shallow. "You are fighting because you are terrified." The blunt, perceptive assessment pierced their defensive posturing. Kenzie stopped pacing mid-stride. Tamsin looked away, staring fixedly at the bleak bunker wall. "We are terrified," Livia admitted, stepping closer to the metal table. Her voice trembled with rare vulnerability. "You leaped in front of a toxic blade for me. You constantly absorb the lethal damage so we do not have to. If you perish, this entire alliance crumbles into dust." "It is significantly more than the political alliance," Tamsin added, her usual abrasive sarcasm completely absent. "You provided us a legitimate home. You gave us purpose." Sybil halted her restless movement. "We cannot function without our alpha. We fell in love with your bravado and your unyielding strength." Roan looked at the four extraordinary women. The austere bunker felt momentarily warm and profound. They were no longer broken outcasts. They were a formidable family, bound by shared trauma and undeniable affection. "I am not leaving you," Roan promised, his voice acquiring a fraction of its former resonance. "But we will fight the Conqueror together, as equals." Chapter 20. 3 grueling days elapsed within the subterranean redoubt. The bountiful supply of captured nutritional rations effectively stabilized the civilian population, while the acquired munitions provided a tangible, much-needed sense of security. Roan's robust biology, aided by Kenzie's relentless medical interventions, finally began neutralizing the debilitating paralytic agent. He remained severely compromised, his left arm essentially immobilized by the toxic silver sutures and his right torso tightly bound in fresh bandages, but he could finally stand upright and walk without the immediate threat of collapse. The War Council convened around the dilapidated steel desk in the bunker's primary staging area. Tamsin illuminated her topographical map tablet, projecting a digitized, glowing schematic of Garrick's Citadel onto the scratched metal surface. "The Conqueror's fortress is an architectural monolith," Tamsin explained, tracing the imposing defensive perimeters with her finger. They utilize reinforced titanium gates, elevated artillery embankments, and maintain a standing garrison of 200 elite guards. A direct siege with our current militia guarantees total, unmitigated slaughter. Roan leaned against the edge of the desk, carefully favoring his uninjured side. Garrick is notoriously paranoid. He will not dispatch his main forces to hunt us in the wilderness. He will wait patiently for us to break ourselves against his walls. We must actively force him to dilute his internal defenses. Sybil tapped her brass compass against her canvas trousers. "How do we accomplish that?" "We cannot starve him out. He controls the regional agricultural yields and the water reservoirs. We create an irresistible vulnerability," Roan deduced, his tactical acumen cutting through the lingering fog of his injuries. "We require a monumental diversion, an overt threat that demands an immediate, overwhelming military response, successfully drawing at least half his garrison away from the titanium gates." Livia frowned, her fingers tracing the woven cord bracelet adorning her wrist. "A diversion of that magnitude requires a highly visible, highly mobile target. Someone capable of outrunning mechanized artillery while sustaining their undivided, furious attention." A profound silence descended upon the cold concrete room. The strategic necessity of the plan was undeniable, but the practical execution was tantamount to a guaranteed suicide mission. Whoever volunteered would be ruthlessly hunted by a relentless, mechanized swarm of seasoned killers. Tamsin swiped the digital display, shifting the map to highlight a sprawling, treacherous network of jagged ravines situated approximately 5 miles east of the Citadel. The terrain was a chaotic labyrinth of lethal drops and narrow, winding corridors, completely inaccessible to heavy transport trucks or armored vehicles. My crimson motorcycle is currently concealed under the brush near the old trading post, Tamsin announced, her voice devoid of any hesitation or fear. It is the only vehicle agile enough to navigate the eastern ravines at maximum velocity. Kenzie stared at the Gamma, her posture stiffening. You cannot outmaneuver concentrated artillery fire on a motorcycle, Tamsin. One glancing strike and you are obliterated. I am not planning to get hit, Tamsin countered smoothly. She looked directly at Roan, her expression a complex tapestry of grim resolve and fierce, unwavering loyalty. I will aggressively assault his southern perimeter, detonate a payload of our captured munitions, and lead his vanguard directly into the labyrinth. You utilize that brief window to breach the titanium gates. Roan's jaw tightened, his protective instincts warring with strategic reality. I will not order you to sacrifice yourself for this campaign. You are not ordering me, Tamsin replied, picking up her tablet and powering down the screen. I am officially volunteering. We demanded a permanent home. This is merely the steep price we must pay to secure it. Chapter 21. The mechanized march toward the Conqueror Citadel commenced beneath a suffocating canopy of slate-gray clouds. The stray militia moved with synchronized precision, utilizing the rugged topography to obscure their massive numbers. Roan led the vanguard, his posture rigidly straight despite the agonizing limitations of his biology. The paralytic agent from the recent ambush had dissipated, yet his left arm remained securely immobilized against his torso to protect the toxic, silver-laced sutures. He gripped a lightweight infantry short sword he had pulled from the bunker's armory that morning, officially replacing the rusted machete he had abandoned days prior. If my legs falter on this jagged terrain, generations will bleed from my failure. Roan ruminated, masking his profound physical discomfort behind a stoic, unyielding expression. He relied on his formidable presence, rather than pugilistic stamina, to inspire the ranks marching behind him. 5 miles east, near the desolate ruins of the old trading post, Tamsin finalized her perilous preparations. She brushed away the thick, decaying foliage, concealing her metallic crimson motorcycle. The machine was a marvel of engineered agility, designed for treacherous labyrinthine environments. She meticulously strapped 3 volatile explosive charges, requisitioned from the captured convoy munitions, onto the rear fender. She verified the placement of her topographical map tablet on the dashboard and ensured her remaining throwing knives were securely fastened in her thigh holster. This is authentic madness, but madness is the singular currency we possess today. Tamsin analyzed, igniting the engine. The motorcycle roared to life, a mechanical beast ready to sprint. She surged forward, navigating the undulating landscape with reckless velocity. Within 20 minutes, the southern perimeter of Garrick's imposing fortress loomed ahead, guarded by elevated watchtowers and reinforced concrete bunkers. Tamsin did not decelerate. She veered parallel to the formidable wall, twisting the throttle to maximum capacity. As she bypassed the primary guard station, she unhooked the first explosive charge and hurled it toward the steel barricades. The resulting detonation shattered the quiet afternoon. A plume of pulverized concrete and orange flame erupted into the sky. The Citadel's defense network reacted instantly. Warning sirens wailed, and heavy artillery embankments swiveled toward the solitary intruder. Mortar shells rained down, obliterating the dirt just meters behind her rear tire. Tamsin swerved violently, steering the pursuit away from the main gates and directing the mechanized swarm toward the treacherous eastern ravines. Dozens of armored pursuit vehicles poured out of the southern exit, blindly chasing the agile crimson blur. Tamsin lured them deeper into the jagged, narrow corridors of the limestone canyon, expertly weaving through the perilous obstacles. However, the terrain abruptly narrowed. A massive rock slide, previously uncharted on her digital map, blocked the exit path. She skidded to a drastic halt, the rear tire kicking up a cloud of dense dust. The armored transports boxed her in, their mounted turrets locking onto her stationary figure. She was trapped in an inescapable choke point. Miles away, Sybil gripped the steering wheel of her rugged slate-gray pickup truck. She had refused to remain idle while a packmate isolated herself. The Delta had commandeered the vehicle from the concrete redoubt, tracking the escalating artillery fire. A predator never abandons a solitary ally to the vultures, Sybil resolved, her jaws set with feral determination. Just as the Conqueror's gunners prepared to unleash a lethal barrage, Sybil's vehicle crested the adjacent ridge. She floored the accelerator, sending the heavy machine cascading down the steep incline. The slate-gray pickup slammed into the flank of the lead armored transport with crushing kinetic force, effectively shattering the enemy barricade. The violent collision created a massive, chaotic gap in the perimeter, providing the Gamma the exact fraction of a second she required to escape the deadly enclosure. Chapter 22. The colossal diversion executed along the southern perimeter proved spectacularly effective. From his concealed vantage point overlooking the Citadel's primary entrance, Roan watched nearly half of the 200 elite guards mobilized toward the eastern ravines. The imposing titanium gates were now drastically under-defended. The Alpha raised his scavenged short sword, the cold metal catching the ambient light, and signaled the vanguard to advance.
Breach the lock!
Kenzie bellowed, sprinting alongside the front line. She carried a bulky canvas satchel slung over her shoulder, a bag she had meticulously packed at the bunker, containing the surplus volatile charges Tamsin had prepared prior to her solitary mission. The strays swarmed the fortified entrance. Kenzie slapped the adhesive explosives directly onto the intricate locking mechanism of the monolithic titanium structure. She retreated, triggering the detonator. A concussive shockwave rippled through the courtyard, obliterating the heavy bolts and sending the colossal doors groaning inward. The stray militia poured through the breach, a tidal wave of righteous fury crashing into the remaining loyalist garrison. The courtyard devolved into a brutal, visceral theater of war. The clash of steel and the staccato rhythm of discharged munitions created a deafening cacophony. Despite the reduced numbers, Garrick's elite guards were fiercely disciplined and heavily armored. They swiftly formed an interlocking phalanx, halting the stray's momentum and threatening to overwhelm the untrained refugees through sheer tactical superiority. I will shatter every bone in this paved courtyard before I permit them to reach our wounded Alpha. Kenzie vowed silently. She bypassed the standard weaponry, relying exclusively on her weighted training gloves. She ducked under a sweeping halberd, driving a devastating uppercut into the guard's sternum, cracking the reinforced breastplate with phenomenal blunt force trauma. While Kenzie and Roan held the chaotic front line, Livia utilized her petite stature to navigate the interstices of the brutal melee. She slipped unnoticed past the battling throngs, her objective lying within the interior command structures. She located a maintenance access panel, prying it open to enter the auxiliary corridors. Swords can conquer flesh, but genuine words possess the power to conquer entire empires, Livia reasoned, her pulse accelerating as she sprinted toward the communications relay room. She encountered a solitary technician frantically manipulating the console. Livia did not hesitate. She lunged forward, using her woven cord bracelet to secure a swift, non-lethal chokehold, rendering the man unconscious within seconds. She stepped over his slumped form, activating the primary intercom system that broadcasted across the entire sprawling fortress. "Listen to me, soldiers of the Conqueror," Livia's melodic, yet fiercely authoritative voice echoed from hundreds of mounted speakers, piercing the din of the courtyard battle. "You bleed today for a tyrant who views you as expendable fodder. Your brothers are dying. To protect an opulent throne room they are forbidden to enter. The Alpha of the Strays offers amnesty. Lower your weapons, break your chains, and claim your own freedom." The broadcast reverberated off the stone walls. In the courtyard, a profound hesitation infected the loyalist ranks. The oppressed guards, long subjected to Garrick's cruel, dictatorial whims, looked at one another. The phalanx faltered. Slowly, a handful of soldiers lowered their shields. Then, a dozen more turned their weapons backward, aiming them directly at their commanding officers. The psychological foundation of Garrick's army crumbled in an instant. The mutiny erupted, transforming the Conqueror's elite guard into a fractured, chaotic mob fighting against itself, clearing the crucial path for the Alpha to advance into the Citadel's dark interior. Chapter 23. The tide of the battle decisively shifted as the internal mutiny paralyzed Garrick's exterior defenses. The courtyard was a chaotic tapestry of surrendering guards and fleeing loyalists. Roan did not linger to manage the prisoners. Accompanied by Kenzie and Livia, who had swiftly rejoined the vanguard after her pivotal broadcast, he pressed deep into the labyrinthine corridors of the interior Citadel. The physical toll of the relentless advance was excruciating. Rowan's breathing emerged in harsh, ragged bursts. The bandaged puncture wound on his right oblique throbbed with a vicious intensity, threatening to buckle his knees with every subsequent stride. He relied significantly on his robust constitution, refusing to slow the pace, while the tyrant remained comfortably entrenched within his stronghold. They navigated a grand vaulted hallway adorned with stolen tapestries and plundered relics, arriving at the antechamber of the Conqueror's primary sanctuary. Blocking their final approach was a pair of colossal reinforced steel doors, deeply set into a solid concrete frame. The barricade was designed to withstand a prolonged siege, lacking any visible hinges or electronic keypads. Iron and steel inevitably yield when subjected to sufficient localized trauma, Rowan evaluated, examining the microscopic seams of the imposing barrier. He pushed his broad shoulder against the metal, testing the resistance, but the structure remained obdurately immobile. Kenzie stepped forward, assessing the formidable obstacle. She unslung the bulky satchel from her shoulder, retrieving the final 2 explosive payloads they had salvaged from the transport convoy. Subtlety was never an advantageous trait in my personal repertoire anyway. Kenzie mused, her expression hardening into a determined mask. "Stand back," Kenzie instructed, wedging the volatile packages directly into the central seam where the 2 massive doors met. She hastily wired the rudimentary detonator, ensuring the sequence was perfectly synchronized. Roan and Livia retreated behind a sturdy marble pillar, shielding themselves from the impending blast radius. Kenzie joined them, depressing the firing mechanism without a shred of hesitation. The enclosed corridor amplified the catastrophic detonation. A blinding flash of incandescent light preceded a concussive shockwave that shattered the adjacent decorative windows. Thick, acrid smoke billowed through the antechamber, obscuring their immediate vision. As the dense dust gradually settled, the catastrophic damage became visible. The precision explosives had violently severed the internal locking mechanisms and obliterated the structural integrity of the steel. The colossal doors did not swing open. They were violently blown inward, their massive frames warped and torn from the concrete foundation. Jagged shards of twisted metal and ruined, smoking hinges littered the pristine marble floor. The doors were permanently destroyed, hanging at grotesque, unnatural angles. They could never be repaired, leaving a gaping, jagged maw leading directly into the heart of the Conqueror's domain. Roan stepped through the ruined threshold, his boots crunching over the pulverized debris. His right hand tightened around the hilt of his scavenged short sword. Kenzie followed closely, her weighted gloves raised defensively, while Livia remained a few paces behind, scanning the shadows for hidden threats. The final barricade had fallen, leaving the disgraced Alpha nowhere left to hide. Chapter 24. The throne room was a cavernous, ostentatious monument to Garrick's megalomania. Towering black marble pillars supported a vaulted ceiling, while the floor was paved with polished, blood-red stone. At the far end of the chamber, elevated on a multi-tiered dais, sat the Conqueror. Garrick was a physically terrifying specimen. His massive, thick-necked frame was clad in dark tailored armor, and his cold slate eyes locked onto the intruders with unbridled malice. This pathetic, scarred whelp should have perished in the dirt alongside his weak ancestors, Garrick sneered internally, slowly rising from his opulent chair. He did not draw a conventional sword. Instead, he raised his massive hands, revealing a pair of brutal, heavy gauntlets interlaced with pure, unadulterated silver wiring. "You bring ruins into my sanctuary, stray," Garrick's voice rumbled, echoing ominously through the vast chamber. "But you are broken. You cannot even lift your left arm to defend yourself." Roan stepped away from Kenzie and Livia, asserting his dominance despite his severe handicaps. The Alpha knew his physical limitations were critical. His left shoulder was practically useless, bound tightly to prevent the toxic sutures from rupturing, and his right oblique screamed with every torso rotation. The confrontation ignited without further preamble. Garrick launched himself from the dais with astonishing speed for a man of his immense bulk. He swung a devastating right hook, the silver-laced gauntlet aimed directly at Roan's skull. Roan ducked, relying on his superior agility, and countered with a sweeping slash of his short sword. The blade sparked violently against Garrick's armored forearm. The Conqueror absorbed the kinetic impact effortlessly, immediately delivering a brutal, driving knee into Roan's bandaged right side. The strike found the exact location of the recent puncture wound. Roan staggered backward, a sharp gasp escaping his lips as fresh agony radiated through his core. I must endure this localized punishment. Physical pain is merely transient information, Roan demanded of his failing body, stubbornly anchoring his boots to the slippery marble floor. He parried a subsequent flurry of heavy blows, utilizing only his right arm to deflect the relentless, pugilistic assault. However, the sheer disparity in healthy stamina became glaringly apparent. Garrick pressed his advantage, raining concussive strikes against Roan's desperate defenses. A glancing blow from the silver gauntlet grazed Roan's jaw, the toxic metal searing his skin and momentarily blurring his vision. Garrick capitalized on the momentary disorientation. He stepped inside Roan's guard, seizing the front of his tactical vest, and executed a flawless, devastating judo throw. The Alpha crashed violently onto the hard stone floor, his blade skittering out of reach. Before Roan could attempt a recovery roll, Garrick dropped his immense weight onto the fallen warrior's chest, effectively pinning him to the blood-red marble. The Conqueror reached behind his armored back, drawing a wicked serrated dagger that gleamed with the unmistakable, deadly sheen of pure silver. Kenzie shouted in fury, sprinting forward to intervene, but the distance was too great. Garrick raised the venomous blade high above his head, his cold slate eyes alight with victorious cruelty, preparing to deliver the final executioner's stroke. Chapter 25. The serrated silver dagger descended toward Roan's exposed throat, propelled by Garrick's vindictive fury. Pinned against the slippery, blood-red marble, the injured Alpha possessed zero leverage to evade the lethal strike. His left arm remained immobilized by toxic sutures, and his right oblique throbbed with paralyzing intensity. He gritted his teeth, refusing to offer the tyrant the satisfaction of a final, terrified plea. I brought them to the precipice of freedom, only to falter at the final step, Roan agonized internally, his vision swimming from sheer exhaustion. Before the venomous steel could pierce his flesh, a sharp metallic whistle sliced through the cavernous throne room. A throwing knife, hurled with immaculate precision, embedded itself deeply into the unprotected joint of Garrick's heavy armor at the wrist. The Conqueror roared in sudden agony, his grip slackening just enough for the silver dagger to clatter harmlessly onto the polished floor. Tamsin and Sybil burst through the ruined threshold simultaneously. The rockslide and vehicular wreckage had effectively trapped the Conqueror's pursuit battalion deep within the narrow canyon. Capitalizing on the localized chaos, the two women commandeered a lagging pursuit vehicle from the convoy's rear, speeding back and ditching it in the chaotic outer courtyard before sprinting through the labyrinthine corridors, following the unmistakable trail of destruction. They leaped over the permanently destroyed titanium doors, which still hung precariously from warped hinges, plunging directly into the fray. I did not survive a high-speed mechanized pursuit just to watch my leader perish on a decorative rug, Tamsin thought fiercely, drawing another blade as she sprinted toward the dais. Kenzie capitalized on the momentary distraction. She launched her robust frame across the intervening distance, colliding with Garrick's flank like a runaway freight train. The sheer kinetic impact knocked the towering antagonist off Roan's chest. Garrick stumbled backward, his armored boots scrambling for traction on the slick marble. "Strip his advantages," Kenzie instructed, recovering her balance immediately and raising her weighted training gloves. The four women orchestrated a synchronized, relentless assault, moving with the cohesive fluidity of a veteran military unit. Garrick attempted to swing his silver-laced gauntlet at Kenzie's jaw, but Sybil intercepted the trajectory. The Delta utilized her feral agility, vaulting onto the tyrant's back and wrapping her sinewy arms around his thick neck, severely restricting his mobility. He is strong, but his arrogance makes his movements sluggish and predictable, Sybil noted, tightening her chokehold as Garrick thrashed violently to dislodge her. Tamsin slid across the floor, targeting the antagonist's lower extremities. She delivered a sweeping kick to his kneecap, forcing the Conqueror to adopt an unbalanced, kneeling posture. Meanwhile, Livia darted into the close quarters melee with characteristic grace. She avoided a wild, desperate backhand from Garrick, slipping her woven cord bracelet off her wrist. With practiced dexterity, the Omega looped the sturdy cord around the locking mechanisms of Garrick's right gauntlet, pulling with all her accumulated strength to unlatch the heavy plating. "Get the armor off him!" Tamsin yelled, securing his other arm. Garrick bellowed, a cacophony of rage and disbelief echoing against the dark pillars. He was entirely unaccustomed to facing coordinated resistance, having spent decades relying on fear and isolated duels to maintain subjugation. Kenzie stepped inside his compromised guard, gripping the loosened right gauntlet, and forcefully ripped the silver-laced weapon from his forearm. She tossed the toxic equipment far across the vast room. Livia mirrored the action on the left side, her fingers working frantically to disengage the remaining clasps while Sybil maintained her restrictive grapple. Within a frantic, breathless minute, the invincible tyrant was methodically dismantled. His heavy armor was discarded, his silver weapons neutralized, and his breath emerged in ragged, panicking gasps. Sybil finally released her hold, pushing the disarmed antagonist forward. Garrick collapsed onto his hands and knees, stripped of every artificial augmentation he had utilized to oppress the wasteland. The four women stepped backward, forming a protective perimeter, leaving the center of the dais clear. Roan slowly pushed himself upright from the red marble, his right hand curling into a steady fist. The arena was finally balanced. Chapter 26. The sprawling, opulent throne room fell deathly silent, save for the ragged respiration of the two opposing figures. Roan stood tall, though his posture betrayed the excruciating toll of his injuries. The bandaged puncture wound on his right oblique seeped fresh crimson, and his left arm remained strictly pressed against his torso. Yet his gaze was resolute, radiating a quiet, indomitable authority that required no opulent crown to validate. Garrick pushed himself up from the cold floor, his previously pristine garments torn and devoid of their silver-laced enhancements. The tyrant's face twisted into a grotesque mask of unfiltered hatred. Stripped of his specialized weaponry, he was reduced to a desperate brawler. "This crippled stray cannot possibly outlast my stamina. I will snap his neck with my bare hands," Garrick plotted frantically, his pride refusing to acknowledge the shifting paradigm of the conflict. "You are nothing without your inherited steel," Roan stated, his voice a low, gravelly baritone that cut through the lingering dust of the exploded entryway. With a feral shriek, Garrick charged. He abandoned all tactical discipline, throwing a wild, looping right hook aimed directly at Rowan's injured ribs. The attack was swift, fueled by the adrenaline of a cornered predator. "I cannot absorb another direct hit. I must redirect his aggression," Roan calculated, forcing his exhausted mind to remain strictly analytical. The Alpha recalled the sparring session in the muddy encampment weeks prior. Kenzie had taught him that immense forward momentum was inherently unstable. As Garrick's fist arced toward his torso, Roan did not attempt to block the strike with his healthy arm. Instead, he pivoted sharply on his right heel, dropping his center of gravity significantly lower than the incoming antagonist. The Conqueror's heavy punch sailed through empty air, his substantial weight carrying him clumsily forward. Roan capitalized on the critical imbalance. He stepped inside Garrick's compromised guard, pressing his back against the tyrant's chest. Reaching up with his functional right hand, Roan grabbed the thick fabric of Garrick's collar. Summoning the final, desperate reserves of his physical strength, Roan executed a flawless, devastating hip throw. He utilized Garrick's own rampant kinetic energy against him, launching the heavier man over his right shoulder. Garrick sailed through the air, his expression morphing from arrogance to profound terror in a singular suspended second. He crashed violently onto the unyielding blood-red marble. The sickening sound of fracturing bone echoed sharply throughout the vaulted chamber. Garrick's head struck the stone dais with catastrophic force, the impact instantly severing his consciousness. The tyrant lay completely motionless, his oppressive reign extinguished, not by silver or sorcery, but by superior technique and unyielding perseverance. Roan stood over his defeated adversary, his chest heaving as the adrenaline rapidly evacuated his system. The profound silence of the Citadel was suddenly broken by the distant, victorious cheers of the stray militia flooding the outer corridors. The rebellion had succeeded. Kenzie rushed forward, her weighted gloves already discarded. She wrapped her sturdy arm around Roan's waist, just as his knees finally buckled. "I have you," the beta assured him, bearing his weight effortlessly. "The battle is concluded." Livia, Tamsin, and Sybil closed ranks around their alpha. Tamsin kicked the discarded silver dagger farther away, ensuring the perimeter remained secure. Sybil exhaled a long breath and knelt beside her. Livia placed a gentle, grounding hand on Roan's uninjured shoulder, her presence a calming anchor amidst the chaotic aftermath. "We actually survived this madness. Now comes the arduous task of rebuilding a shattered world," Livia contemplated, looking around the ostentatious room that would soon transform from a prison into a genuine sanctuary. Roan leaned heavily against Kenzie, allowing his eyes to close briefly, secure in the knowledge that his chosen family had held the line. Chapter 27. The Citadel transitioned rapidly from a war zone into a bustling epicenter of recovery. The strays, alongside the mutinous guards who had surrendered their arms, worked collaboratively to clear the pulverized debris from the courtyard. The permanently destroyed titanium doors were shoved aside, leaving the interior antechamber open to the crisp evening breeze. Garrick's incapacitated form had been securely bound and relocated to the subterranean holding cells, awaiting a formal tribunal. Inside the cavernous throne room, Roan sat on the lower steps of the dais, refusing to occupy the opulent chair that symbolized decades of tyranny. His scavenged tactical vest lay discarded on the floor. Kenzie knelt beside him, her comprehensive first aid kit open, diligently cleaning and redressing the puncture wound on his right oblique. The silver sutures on his left shoulder remained inflamed, but the immediate threat of sepsis was neutralized. "You require at least 2 uninterrupted weeks of bed rest," Kenzie lectured, applying a sterile bandage with clinical precision. "If you attempt to lift anything heavier than a map, I will personally sedate you." He continues to prioritize the logistics of the camp over his own failing biology, Kenzie worried, securing the medical tape with a sharp, definitive tug. Roan offered a weary, appreciative nod. He stared at the polished marble floor, the tarnished silver coin resting securely in his pocket. The immense gravity of his new reality pressed heavily upon his exhausted shoulders. He had fought exclusively for survival and the safety of his people. He had never actively desired to rule an empire. "The structural damage to the eastern sector is extensive, but the armory is fully secured," Tamsin reported, striding into the room. She held her topographical tablet, already drafting defensive perimeters for their newly acquired territory. Sybil followed closely behind, her gaze scanning the vaulted ceiling. "The local wildlife is abundant in the northern valleys. Our agricultural outposts can be operational before the first frost. Nobody will starve in this fortress." Livia approached the group, carrying a tray of freshwater canteens. She distributed them carefully, her woven cord bracelet catching the flickering torchlight. The civilian refugees are selecting their quarters. For the first time in their lives, they are sleeping behind reinforced walls without fearing the guards. Roan accepted a canteen, drinking deeply. He looked at the 4 remarkable women standing around him. "We conquered a tyrant today. But occupying a fortress does not automatically create a functioning society. I am a warrior, forged in the dirt. I do not possess the diplomatic finesse to govern thousands of traumatized citizens. If I issue the wrong decree, I risk becoming the exact monster we just violently deposed," Roan admitted silently, a rare flicker of profound insecurity shadowing his features. "I will manage the tactical defenses and infrastructure. Sybil will oversee the hunting territories and scouting divisions. Kenzie will supervise the medical wards and internal security. And Livia will handle the diplomacy, ensuring we do not accidentally declare war on our neighbors over a misunderstanding," Kenzie added, a faint smirk softening her stoic face. Sybil rested a hand on Roan's uninjured shoulder. "We fought for a home. We will govern it together. You are our alpha, but we are your equals in this endeavor." The profound loyalty anchoring their words dismantled Roan's lingering anxieties. He looked up at the elevated, empty throne, realizing it would never be occupied by a solitary dictator again. They would construct a new council table, circular and inclusive. The outcast boy who had fled into the dark woods decades ago had finally found his permanent sanctuary, surrounded by the strongest family the wastelands had ever produced. Chapter 28. One prosperous year passed, radically transforming the Conqueror's former citadel into a thriving egalitarian society. The oppressive stone pillars were draped with vibrant, woven banners representing the unified stray packs. The permanently ruined titanium doors had been replaced by a welcoming, open archway, symbolizing an era of transparency and mutual trust. Agricultural terraces flourished outside the walls, and the courtyard echoed with the joyous laughter of children rather than the harsh drills of a subjugated militia. Within the primary staging area, an atmosphere of joyous chaos reigned. Today marked the culmination of their arduous journey, a historic, quadruple wedding ceremony unifying the leadership council. Livia stood before a tall mirror, adjusting the delicate lace sleeves of her ivory gown. She hummed a cheerful, melodic tune, ensuring her woven cord bracelet was prominently displayed beneath her floral bouquet. Diplomacy is infinitely easier when the negotiating parties are not actively trying to assassinate each other, she mused, a radiant smile gracing her reflection. Across the hall, Tamsin paced restlessly in her tailored, crimson suit. She continuously checked her topographical map tablet, monitoring the exterior security patrols out of ingrained habit. The perimeter is entirely secure, Tamsin. Nobody is going to launch a mortar strike during the vows, Kenzie chastised gently, entering the room. The beta wore a stunning, minimalist cobalt blue dress that highlighted her athletic physique, her weighted gloves notably absent for the first time in recent memory. Old habits die exceptionally hard, Tamsin muttered, finally setting the digital device on a side table. Sybil bounded through the doorway, looking remarkably uncomfortable in her flowing, slate-gray attire. This fabric is restricting my peripheral movement. If a rogue bear attacks the ceremony, my evasive maneuvers will be severely compromised. I would rather face a dozen armed trackers than attempt to walk down an aisle in these ridiculous heels, Sybil lamented internally, subtly kicking the offending footwear into a corner. Meanwhile, Roan stood in the adjacent chambers, looking out over the bustling courtyard. His dark formal wear was pristine. The stitched silver wound on his left shoulder had long since healed into a pale, rugged scar, restoring his full mobility. He reached into his left pocket, his fingers brushing the tarnished silver coin. He wished his father could witness the kingdom he had helped forge. The ceremonial music commenced, a harmonious arrangement echoing through the vaulted halls. The strays gathered in the main courtyard, their faces glowing with genuine happiness. Roan stepped onto the sunlit dais, his heart hammering with profound anticipation. He watched as the four extraordinary women who had saved his life and his soul walked down the central aisle together. Livia's grace, Tamsin's sharp intellect, Sybil's untamed spirit, and Kenzie's unwavering strength had woven together to create an unbreakable foundation for their new world. They joined him at the altar, exchanging vows that promised equality, protection, and enduring affection. There were no opulent crowns presented, only simple, forged bands of iron and silver. As the ceremony concluded, Roan kissed his brides, sealing a pact that transcended simple romance. They were a family forged in the crucible of the wastelands, ready to lead their prosperous kingdom into a bright, unified future. And, quick favor, don't go anywhere yet. If you thought Livia was bold for hijacking a tyrant's intercom to trigger a massive mutiny, wait until you meet the heroine in this next story on your screen. You have to hear this disaster unfold. Click the video on your screen right now. It is entirely unhinged.